Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Liza Fleming-Ives, Executive Director of the Genesis Fund and Chair of the MAHC Board, and welcome to our rescheduled MAHC February membership meeting. We've got over 120 participants registered to join us today for the call, and we're using the Zoom platform in webinar mode, so all participants are in listen-only mode, and then for those of you that are signed on your computers, your video is turned off. So we're not using the chat feature today. If you have questions as our presenters are speaking, we ask that you use the Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar to type in your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible in the time that we have. We are recording the meeting, and we'll make the link available to everyone by email after. We've got a full agenda today with updates on federal housing policy, the state affordable housing tax credit program, the soon to be relaunched state rent relief program, and an overview of the state legislative session. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm going to have Greg Payne, MAHC Director, join me on video. And our first guest for the day, we're welcoming back Diane Yantel, who was with us for the Housing Policy Conference in December. Diane is the President and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, a leading housing policy organization that's dedicated to ensuring that people with the lowest incomes in the country have an affordable place to call home. And Diane is at the heart of advocacy efforts right now to ensure that federal relief funds provide immediate support to millions of renters that are at risk of losing their home right now in the pandemic. So Diane, we're thrilled to have you here with us today to share an outlook on federal housing policy. Thank you so much for coming back and joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to Greg to kick it off with a question, but we'll also be monitoring the Q&A box, as I mentioned earlier. So please, for folks participating today, if you have questions you want to ask Diane, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll try to get to those too. So welcome, Diane. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Liza. Good morning, everyone. As Liza said, I'm going to ask some questions here of Diane, who continues to be at the forefront of so many of these federal issues. But we know people have a lot of questions. So Liza and I are going to, try to filter in your questions as best we can. And Diane, thanks again for taking time to join us. I think, December 8th or whatever it was when you joined us, if I recall, I think you predicted that the Senate would go Democrat and we'd all survive an insurrection. And it came to pass.
Yes, I'm sure I did.
And so here we are. And in fact, the Democrats do now control the Senate, and obviously that changes a lot. So we're going to get into some of that and what you see as coming as a result of that, are certainly possible. But I guess where I want to start is with the most short term and most imminent, and that is around rent relief, because I think, as folks know, and in large part due to the work that Senator Collins did, there was a large amount of rent relief passed by Congress in late December, but there are rules to that program that have not been finalized, and until those rules are finalized by US Treasury, that money can't get out and doing all the things it's supposed to do. So my first question is, do you know what's going on with Treasury and how long it might be before those rules are going to come out?
I don't know, and thanks for having me back. It's always good to be a part of this meeting. So, and also, Greg, I like your signs behind you. I appreciate that you put the "Our Homes, Our Votes" and "Our Homes, Our Voices" signs. I don't know what's taking so long, and I don't know when it's going to come out. So, just to be clear, there doesn't have to be like a formal regulation for ERA. But Treasury will put out some guidance on some of the gray areas in the legislation and how give guidance to program administrators on really key important areas for how they design their programs. And the problem is that on the last day of the Trump administration, on January 19th, the Department of Treasury put out an FAQ, which is guidance to program administrators. And it's very problematic for a lot of reasons that you all that are on this call are probably aware of. But one of the things that we have been pushing very hard is for the Department of Treasury to, one, encourage or require program administrators to target the funds as deeply as possible to the lowest income and most marginalized renters. And then beyond that, to provide as much flexibility as possible to program administrators and to allow for self-certification of need and self-certification wherever possible. So to make it as easy as possible to get the money out to the people who need it the most. So unfortunately, the FAQ that Treasury put out does the opposite of that and actually requires a lot of really burdensome, unnecessary documentation in several areas and creates layers of bureaucracy that don't need to be there. So the day of Biden's inauguration, we were in touch with people in Treasury and at the White House. They were well aware of why the FAQ is so problematic, and they got right to work on revising it. Of course, that's 3 weeks ago now, today. And in the meantime, we have been urging them to take down that problematic FAQ because we know, I don't know if folks in Maine are using it, but I know there are program administrators in several areas around the country that are using that problematic guidance now to create their programs, which is just a mess. So we've urged the Department of Treasury to take that FAQ down until they're able to get the new one up. For whatever reason, they're not able to do that. What they did was they put some language around it in bold saying, we're revising this FAQ and it'll be out very shortly. That was a week and a half ago that they put that out. So I will say that, the good news is that I know that, one, the Department of Treasury is relying a lot on the expertise of the political appointees at the Department of HUD. So that's good news. They're working together very closely on an FAQ. I believe that Secretary Yellen and Secretary-designate Fudge agree for the most part on what we have been urging them to do, and they are revising the FAQ, and it's coming any day, but I just don't know when.
Okay. All right, good. And I know we're going to hear from Dan Brennan from Maine Housing a little later on. I know Maine Housing's been doing a lot of work to kind of get that program ready to go. So as soon as those rules get finalized, they can put it out on the street. The next thing I wanted to ask you about is the next COVID relief bill that seems to be on the horizon. And I think folks are aware that there's this pretty large package of $1.9 trillion that the Biden administration is looking at, and a piece of it involves housing. And so I was hoping you could help us understand what those pieces are, how they're different from the rent relief that was passed at the end of December, and any thoughts you have on how likely it is to make it into the final package that seems to be getting ready to sail through the reconciliation process.
Yeah, so President Biden put out his proposal for what should be in the next COVID relief package, I think just a little bit before his inauguration. As you said, it's a $1.9 trillion package. For housing and homelessness, he proposed $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, $5 billion for utilities assistance, and $5 billion for homelessness. So $35 billion total. And he proposed extending the federal eviction moratorium through the end of September. And of course, in the meantime, through executive action, he's already extended the moratorium through the end of March. So what happens now is, as you said, the Democrats have decided that they're going to use reconciliation to move this package forward. So they're going to do it. They're going to do it with a simple majority, likely only or very few Republicans, only Democrats with very few, if any, Republicans joining. And they're going to move it very quickly. Their goal is to get a COVID relief package enacted by March 15th, which is when the current unemployment, extended unemployment insurance benefits expire. So they're going to move fast. So the first part of that process is for the Budget Committee to give reconciliation instructions to each of the relevant committees with their top line number that they have to spend within the overall reconciliation bill. And I should say too that the Democrats decided from the outset that 1.9 trillion is their ceiling. They're not going above that. But they are moving some things around within that ceiling. So for housing, House Financial Services Committee got their top line number of $75 billion, and they wrote a bill to that number. They released their bill on Friday, and they're starting to debate and vote on that bill today. And it's likely to go several days because there's going to be many amendments from the Republicans to strike parts of the bill. So what's in the House Financial Services Committee bill, and I will say that they are working very closely with the Senate, their Senate counterparts on the housing provisions. So it's very likely to be similar there. What they have done is provided $25 billion for rental assistance, but they split it up for different programs. So within that $25 billion, about $19 billion is for emergency rental assistance. Like the $25 billion that we just got, another $19 billion on top of that, with some changes to how, some improvements to the program. Then $5 billion for vouchers, what they're calling emergency vouchers, and what are essentially going to be sunsetting vouchers. So $5 billion for tens of thousands of families to get Section 8 vouchers and use them until they no longer need them, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and then the voucher expires at that point. It doesn't get reissued. And then there's another like $700 or $800 million for rural and tribal housing. Then $5 billion for homelessness. And that money will likely go through the HOME program and can be used for homelessness services, deconcentrating shelters, and for acquisition of hotels, motels, other non-traditional spaces to convert it into permanent supportive housing. And then there's almost $10 billion for homeowners through the Homeowners Assistance Fund. And through a separate bill, there's going to be $4.5 billion for LIHEAP, for utilities. So they actually went higher in the overall housing provisions than Biden did. And I think it's very likely that most, if not all of this, will be enacted in 5 weeks from now. Because again, the Democrats are staying very disciplined on this. Each of the committees are going to vote on their own bills this week and next week. Then it's going to be wrapped into one big package. It's going to go to the House floor for a vote. And then once the Senate gets done with impeachment this week, they're going to start the same process. And they're going to stay as aligned as they can, because the closer they keep the bills to each other, the less of a delay it causes. And so I think it's very likely that we will get, maybe as much as $19 billion for ERA and new money for vouchers and new money for homelessness, which would be phenomenal. I would say that the money, it's important to know that the extension of the eviction moratorium through the end of September is not included in the House Financial Services or the Senate Banking, or very likely the final bill, because of the reconciliation process that they're using to pass this bill doesn't allow for it to be included. So, we're working with the administration for them to use their executive authority to continue that eviction moratorium. And again, so today, the House Financial Services Committee votes today. It's going to be at least a 2-day, maybe even a 3-day vote, because they're expecting dozens and dozens of amendments from the Republicans to try to knock out many, many pieces of the bill, including the housing provisions. So we'll have to make sure that everything remains as it is.
Okay, and one of the things that is noted in the Q&A box, I think there's $100 million in there for housing counseling too.
Yes, that's right. So $10 billion for homeowners is $9.96 billion for help with mortgages and so on. And then yes, $100 million for housing counseling.
Great. And the piece that, like, for some small states like Maine, which kind of got a pretty large chunk of rent relief in December, $200 million. And I think there's a little bit of how we're going to spend all that by December going on. My understanding is that this new, say the 19 billion passes on top of this to do a similar kind of rent relief. My understanding is that there's a longer time frame in which to spend that.
Yeah, there's two really important changes there. One is that the spending deadline will go all the way through September 2025. And the current tranche can only be used for people who have lost income or have a financial need due to COVID-19, directly or indirectly. The new tranche of money is for people who have challenges with their housing during or due to COVID-19. So it's a broader set of people that could be eligible for these funds.
And it can be spent through 2025 or something like that. Okay.
Through 2025, yeah. And again, that's a piece that, hopefully that stays. The spending pieces are easier to be confident that it'll make it through the reconciliation process. Any places where they're changing language in the bill has to meet a very high standard to get through the Senate. But that's what's in the House bill right now.
Okay. And we have a few minutes left. I was hoping you could just give us your perspective on the new world of Washington, and given that Democrats now control the House and the Senate and have the White House, what do you think that means, like big picture? What do you see coming down the pike given Democratic control?
I think there's incredible opportunity to get big investments in the programs that we all care about and have been working to increase for many, many years. The Democrats it's not only that they're in the majority, but it's that they've decided to be really bold with their majority and use reconciliation, not just now for COVID-19 relief, but they're going to immediately, once this passes, pivot to potentially an even larger infrastructure stimulus package. And they very likely intend to use reconciliation for that as well. So one, that's why it's important that we start to kind of build a bridge with this COVID relief package, that it's not only for immediate needs, but it's also starting to look at the longer term needs with the vouchers or the acquisition funds for homelessness. But that stimulus infrastructure package is potentially an opportunity to get big investments in repairing and even expanding public housing, in expanding the low-income housing tax credit, expanding National Housing Trust Fund, expanding vouchers. And of course, we're not going to get all of it in a package, but we could get a lot, if we keep working with our partners in Congress and keep making the case for why housing is infrastructure and is stimulus and why it fits so squarely within an infrastructure stimulus package. We have really big opportunities. And then I just want to note that, of course, your Senator Susan Collins has always been a champion for housing and homelessness. And she's always, for a long time now, she's been in a really important role as the ranking member of the Housing Subcommittee on Appropriations. One, to say that in 2 years, it's very likely that she'll be the ranking member of the full Appropriations Committee because Senator Shelby is retiring. So her power is going to grow in this area. And also to say that this is the first year in 10 years where we have not been under the really low arbitrary caps from the Budget Control Act. For 10 years, the appropriations bills, we've been very limited and only been able to pretty much keep what we have. This is the first year that the Budget Control Act is not a factor. So there's opportunities even through regular order to start increasing funding for key programs.
Great. And so I assume as these things happen, to the degree that especially any members of our congressional delegation are in a role to be particularly impactful, we'll look out for word from you about what we can do.
I'll be in touch, yes, for sure.
I think we've reached that point in our agenda. I thank you, Diane, again, for spending the time to talk all this through with us.
Sure, I'm glad to. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Diane, thank you so much.
Thanks, Liza.
We're going to shift now to a conversation about the state low-income housing tax credit. And I am going to have John Kaminsky from Drummond Woodsum and Bill Shanahan from Evernorth and Dan Brennan from Maine Housing join us on video. Welcome, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Great. I want to just remind folks to go ahead and put those questions in the Q&A box and we'll get to them. You can direct them to sort of individuals here speaking or just to the group, and we will try to get to as many of those as possible.
Yeah, I think probably folks have a lot of questions. So I guess I want to remind our panelists here too, that there's certainly a healthy percentage of people that are on this call right now that don't know the ins and outs and acronyms that some of us who actually put projects together know. So we'll try to be as plain speak as possible. I want to ask John Kaminsky to start us off and just So folks know, before we get into it, John was the kind of the principal author of the state affordable housing tax credit legislation. He's also kind of our point person in crafting the sort of state fix that has to happen as a result of what John's going to talk about. But he's doing that without special compensation. And I just want to thank John publicly for his work on this. I know he does it because he cares about it and he finds it interesting. We offered to pay him a lot and he declined and just said, no, just let me be a panelist on a mock membership call, and that's all I need. And so we're giving him that now. So thank you, John. And thank you, Drummond Woodsum, for allowing you to spend all the time you have on this. So the question I want to start us off with is, we all remember from December, we won this big victory where, the federal 4% low-income housing tax credit got set at a flat 4% rate instead of being a variable rate that had gone down to about 3%. That was big news. Could you walk us through the impact of that on our new state affordable housing tax credit and what exactly we have to do in order to take advantage of the upside of that federal change at the state level?
Sure, Greg, I'm happy to do that. Back in December, the federal legislation, as Greg said, set the federal 4% floor at a fixed rate of a floor of 4%. By way of contrast, it would have been 3.09% for January of this year. So it's about a 33% increase in the federal 4% tax credit, which will really help generate more affordable housing construction all across the country. Here in Maine, we enacted our state low-income housing tax credit, which is just about to take flight in deals that are in the pipeline now. We enacted it, and we said in that legislation that the Maine credit is equal to the federal 4% credit for a particular transaction. So one might think that automatically Maine now has a 4% floor on its credit. That's not entirely accurate because of a tax geek type of thing. In Maine, the references in our tax code to the federal tax code are to the code that exists as of a certain date. So right now, the state tax code refers to the federal code as it existed at the end of 2019. The state legislature periodically does what's called conformity and brings the Maine tax code into line with the federal code as enacted, including all the changes that Congress has made. So right now, if you were to close a deal today and get an allocation today, you get 4% federal credits if your bonds were issued in 2021, and you get 3 and a fraction % Maine credits. We fully expect that the legislature is going to enact conformity and create a situation where both the Maine credit and the federal credit have 4% floors. Greg, that leads to another problem that I can address that necessitates a tweak to the Maine affordable housing tax credit statute. Because it's quite possible that if we had a federal 4% credit and a Maine 4% credit, both in the same transaction, that a deal might end up having too many tax credits, more tax credits than are needed to make the deal financially feasible with the other resources that are also available to the deal. What federal law would require right now, if we've got to leave the Maine and the federal credit exactly equal, what federal law would require is that Maine State Housing give less than the full 4% worth of federal credits to the deal. If Maine Housing did that, it would ratchet back both the federal credit and the Maine credit. The consequence of that would be that the state of Maine would be leaving federal money on the table, which is not a good result. We want to get as much of the federal resources as possible to Maine, and we want to conserve, if we can, the Maine credit so we can build more units. So the legislation that has been drafted and is being proposed would allow Maine housing in situations like the one I've described, where we have more tax credits than are needed to make a deal feasible, would allow Maine housing to separately reduce the Maine tax credit allocated to a deal while still claiming the full 4% federal credit. And this would help resource allocation, get all the federal money that we can for the transactions, and at the same time conserve the Maine credit, which is running at a legislative cap of about $10 million a year, conserve that, use it to build more units. Sometimes we hear people using the word oversourced for these deals, that there's too many sources of funds for a transaction. I personally don't like that word because to those who aren't down deep in the weeds of doing these deals, that makes it sound like there's too much money out there for affordable housing projects. But for these deals that have more credits than are needed to make them financially feasible, Maine housing, if the new legislation passes, would be able to conserve the Maine credit while still getting the full benefit of the federal credit. We've talked about this legislation with Speaker Fecto's office. Greg has talked with that office, and he's very favorable to it. So we expect that one way or another, we may get this legislative fix enacted.
John, that was great. That was really helpful. And yeah, as we work with Speaker Fecto and others at the legislature, we'll be in touch with people to let you know how that's going and what particular path it's taking. I wanted to ask Bill just to kind of step back for a second here and put this in a little bit more of a larger perspective. If you are developing housing or a part of a team of developing housing, or you're an advocate, what does it mean? How does it help the kind of typical project that was seeking to use 4% credits and state credits as a result of what Congress did and what this legislation would allow? How does that change the game generally?
It was working before we fixed the 4% credit to a full 4%. And then to have the 4% fixed, meant that you got a 25-30% boost in your equity contributions. So you had a program that was designed to work on a floating 4% rate, and it only got better. So if you're looking at a project that might drive, and John said, like, start with the calculation that we all do for federal tax credits. That's your starting point. And then use that and assume in a 9% transaction, like a typical project that might drive, $450,000 worth of credits. A 9% transaction at whatever the pricing is, say 85 cents, that might produce, $3.8 million. A 9% transaction, typical 9% transaction might produce $3.8 million in equity. Well, a combined federal and state LIHTC project is going to produce 3.7 just with this fixed 4% tax rate and whatever pricing you might get in the open market. So a combination of these two programs will bring you basically whole to what a 9% project would have done. And that was always the kind of test as we were trying to run the projects and see like what would work. The other thing is as we start to do these projects and pencil them, bear in mind that you're going to have to get folks used to the idea. I mean, this program doesn't exist in any other state. So if you're talking to syndicators or investors, you've got some explaining to do because, this program is very efficient, and, folks you talk to might be a little incredulous, but, tell them too that, this was based upon a very successful historic credit program that was launched years ago. So we have history, we have a legislative backing on this. And if you kind of walk through the principles and the way that the project lays out, it's a relatively it's a very potent, but very relatively simple project, a simple calculation. And, you know, bear in mind that you're going to have to explain that this credit gets allocated to a special limited partner with a de minimis amount of allocations for benefits and cash. But in the end, if you can be patient and explain how this program will work, I think people are going to come around very quickly to it. We've talked before in this forum about the equity markets and how they were probably softer, or we hope softer in 2020 than they are in 2021. Certainly a 4% credit floor helped the equity amount in these deals, so that you're, you know, I don't want to get too wonky, but the capital counts in these projects, you know, are a concern in the way deals get structured, but we've found ways around that. So be patient with the new program, and we can all work to sell it as we try to put these projects together. I do want to note that these projects will probably not work with historic credits for capital account reasons. You know, if you're going to combine LIHTC with historic credits, it's going to be a difficult deal to structure. I just want to kind of footnote this discussion with that, if you will.
Dan, we've got some questions coming in from folks on the call. One is, does the fix to the state credit need to happen before deals can move forward in 2021 that want to use it?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the plan, is to try and implement this fix as soon as we can. And that's why I know John and Peter Merrill of my shop have been working with the legislator to get this fix in. You know, who knew that, you know, a year ago would be talking about all of these things that are occurring. These are incredible positives that have happened that we've been really fighting for many, many years. And so now it's here. So it's just an observation of, okay, we've got, you know, a tremendous amount of money for rental assistance. We've got a tremendous change going on in the tax credit world. These are really unprecedented in our time. So it's exciting. I think the way that John articulated how we go about bringing all these resources together made a lot of sense. Our job is to basically rebalance deals that we currently have in, so that we're maximizing the federal resource, making the most efficient use of our subsidy, and the most effective use of the state credit. And I think we've got a good game plan in place. So I think timing to do it as soon as possible makes the most sense for everybody.
And there are some sort of deadlines around the state credit. Are we in danger of losing any of the state credit as the changes are happening?
Not that I'm familiar with. No. I can, if I could, we've gone through the process of the 9% process that ended up towards the end of last year. We had 5 projects that were selected for 9% credit. 3 of those projects have morphed into 4% and state tax credit deals, which allow us to now go ahead and reallocate that 9% credit down the waiting list to 3 more projects. In addition, the first project on the waiting list was able to also take advantage of the state tax credit. So at the end of the day, this process will result in 4 additional projects, all funded through the state tax credit, total of 9 deals over 430 units. And so that's just a huge step. We're in the final stages of the legal processing of paperwork back and forth. So we'll be updating the outcome on our website of these 9 deals in the coming days. All of these agreements have been reached, and now the lawyers are just passing the papers back and forth. But it's an exciting time. And I know that folks are interested as where we go next, and we're going to have a meeting on March 2nd. We're going to call an interested parties meeting for everyone to get together and talk about the strategy we just executed. Did it work? Was it the right way to do this? How do we want to go about it going forward? Do we keep the same strategy, or do we rethink it? A lot of thought process, a lot of moving parts right now, but again, it's an exciting time, and the partnership that we have with everyone has made this all work. So it's good times.
And Dan, the state credit rule as approved kind of created a priority for use of the state credit in projects located in qualified census tracts and
Yep.
difficult to develop areas. And there was probably some logic around that because we didn't have a 4% floor. We had a 3% tax credit,
Right.
maybe a 3% state credit. And so projects weren't all that, they were less feasible than they would be certainly as 4% projects now. But I guess that's one of the things. Is that a subject that I guess you'd include in the March partner meeting you'd have, is how you handle whether state credit projects would have to be in a QCT or DDA?
I think so, Greg. I think that with all of the things that have changed since our initial set of assumptions, it makes sense to step back and say, okay, how do each one of these impact our moving forward? And so we want to absorb and think through those issues. We want to have dialogue and input from others. We do have the luxury of a little bit of time before our next round to figure out the best way to go about it. And as you know, these things are so complex and there are so many moving parts. We just want to carefully think it through. We thought getting together in March made a lot of sense to do a deep dive, if you will.
We have another question that's just come in. If that strategy that comes out of the March meeting, Dan, suggests that the QAP may need to be modified, is that something that can happen sooner rather than waiting?
Yeah, I mean, we have a 2-year QAP, which everyone loves. In my time of doing this, we've come out with 2-year QAPs maybe 3 or 4 times. And very rarely do you get through that second year without having to open it up and touch it a little bit. So if we need to, if we think that makes the most sense, we have the luxury of being able to do that.
Great. And when Dan, when you guys decide when to hold that meeting, we're certainly happy to share it with our membership. I think that's great. People would be really interested in it.
I've got March 2nd, Greg. March 2nd, 9 a.m.
No, okay.
And I may have just blown past it. So March 2nd, 9 a.m. We'll be putting out a notice and looking forward to talking with folks. We don't have to set up a room. We just set up Zoom.
Right. Okay, that's great. We're coming close to the end of our time here. I guess I wanted to ask Bill, though, too, if you might just quickly give us your latest take on where the tax credit investor market is going right now, or is it continuing to trend in happy directions, or what's happening?
I feel much better about it than I did in 2020, and I haven't seen any kind of tangible changes except, you've had an change in administration, CRA discussions have kind of leveled off. There's a possibility of an increased corporate tax rate. All those kinds of things kind of take a lot of the uncertainty out of the market and create some urgency. There is some speculation that by fixing the floor, you're creating more supply of 4% credits. I don't know whether that's enough to dampen the demand for them and cause a price adjustment. But right now, I mean, investors are really steady with their support of the program, and I wouldn't say unprecedented, but it feels like we're back to business as usual. But we'll see. Appetites flow back. They wane back and forth, and we've had traditionally some difficulties placing 4% transactions because of the size of the equity investment and the amount of work that has to go into it. So it'll be interesting to test the market now and see whether things are stabilized to a point where people are wanting these projects, these 4% projects. But it feels a whole lot better than it did. Well, February of last year, it didn't feel so bad, but the wheels kind of fell off in March of last year, and it was a second quarter hiatus for us, and I certainly don't see that coming at all. And when I look at the pipeline across the 3 states, northern New England, we're making edits every day in terms of new projects that are coming in. Projects that weren't feasible a year ago are suddenly now feasible, and people are starting to design programs or design projects or try to capitalize projects that you know, they weren't even considered a year ago. And the HFAs have been leaning in and receptive to, you know, using tax-exempt bond monies the way, in an unprecedented way. So that's really, really healthy.
Okay, great. And it's probably worth mentioning, you know, Diane Yantel alluded to the fact that there's going to be some work done on the low-income housing tax credit, you know, in the year ahead. And beyond just expanding the 9% tax credit allocation to the states, I think that's very much on the table. That may possibly make it into an infrastructure bill. You know, folks should know too that there are other provisions that are very much on the table too, including tweaks to the program to help rural projects. I think some tweaks to help support projects that would lower rents, you know, beyond the kind of maximum LIHTC rents. But there's a lot of pieces and parts going on. And, you know, I think as Bill suggests, there's a lot of reason to be hopeful as we move forward because they're all seeming to be helpful rather than hurtful.
Take the subtle suggestion that we reduce the 50% bond test to 25%. It opens up debt opportunities to investors. And, you know, that's one of the reasons they've shied away from 4% transactions is the lack of debt opportunities. And so something as subtle as moving that test from 50 to 25, plus a 4% floor, and the healthy housing support for, you know, infrastructure is going to make a big difference as we kind of cobble together all the resources we're used to having to put projects together. So it's those kinds of things that are going to cumulatively have a really positive effect on you know, our ability to produce housing, reserve housing.
That's great.
That's great. Well, Bill and John, thank you both for joining us and sharing this morning. And we're going to ask Dan actually to stay with us for just a moment. So,
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan, we wanted just to, we heard from Diane that with the launch of the new rent relief program that, you know, a lot is happening at the federal level still, and you're waiting on guidance also from Treasury. But we wondered if you could just share a little bit about what you know about the new state relief, rent relief program, and also how it might be different than previous rent relief programs that you've put out.
Sure. Thank you. I don't know if Diane's still with us, but I want to thank her for her advocacy in Washington. We've got our own advocates that we work with as an HFA. They're all doing the same thing. We have the right people engaged on the issue with U.S. Treasury to get this guidance revised and changed. I will say that it is one of the more frustrating experiences in recent memory. And we are in a position now where we are heading quickly towards the middle part of February. And January rent has come and gone and it's come due and it's gone, and now February rent. And we don't have a rent relief program. We have $200 million in our bank account. We have the money, and we have thousands of people that need help. But we don't have the rules on how to use the money, and incredibly, incredibly frustrating and hard to sort of justify to those that aren't as close to it to say, we can't stand up a program. To Diane's point about let's not use the FAQs to create the program, every single state in the country is using that FAQ because it's all we have. And when you get into the logistics of having to create an application, you need to know what the rules are to create a proper application. And so we just can't stand by and do nothing. So we're moving full bore 100% every day, drafting up a program that we really hope we don't have to stand up because we want that guidance to change. But nonetheless, we have been working day and night for the last several weeks with the community action agencies, with the advocates, to craft up a program that will deploy this $200 million as soon as we know what the final rules are. So I can't underscore enough the the anxiety and the frustration that we're feeling here at Maine Housing, let alone with those folks out there in the world that need the help. The part of the anxiety is we know that this tool is going to be so much more robust and helpful than what we've been able to deploy so far. We don't plan to have a maximum cap on the rental amount that we can pay. We know that southern parts of the state, the $1,000 cap that we had before didn't really work all that well in many cases. It helped a little bit, but we're not going to have a cap on that to accommodate higher rental areas of the state. We can use the money for arrearages going back to the beginning of the pandemic. We can wipe out all arrearages. We can use this money for utilities. Landlords can work with their tenants to deploy the money and clean up past arrearages and take anxiety way, way down. We have a significant amount of money that we can use for housing stability services, which will be a much more robust approach to help people that are in the most difficult of circumstances. We've been working closely with the community action agencies to help them staff up to meet the demand. You can imagine that for the programs that we ran at the latter part of 2020, we know that we helped about 9,000 to 10,000 households. So we know that that at least 9,000 or 10,000 applications are going to be coming right off the bat first thing. That's going to be an enormous amount of demand put on a system. So we need to make that system as strong as we can. So all those activities are happening, but yet the key piece is that the current FAQs call for documentation requirements, verification of income, pay stubs, and other types of paperwork that need to be submitted with each application that we know from other states just don't work. It will clog up the processing of applications, slow down the ability to get payments out, and won't be nearly as effective. All of the advocates nationwide have been of one voice that Diane mentioned. No, let's use self-certification. Let's use the affidavit approach. So on one hand, we are going 100 miles an hour to get this program stood up. On the other hand, we really don't want to stand up this program that we're working on, but we can't sit still. We have to have something. And so that's kind of the position we're in. It's tough. And I think what we've been trying to do is simply message to everyone out there that we are hard at work, we are putting this together, and if documentation is required at the end of the day, here's how you can be best prepared when you apply. And that's kind of an overview of where we're at.
Great.
That's great. I know we're running kind of pretty much out of time here. Quick question that had come up a little while back is, can Maine Housing hire temporary staff to get through and process this big wave of applications for the new rent relief program to ensure that distribution is equitable?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of strategies. Number one, we've been in touch with the Department of Labor about possible strategies around that. Each of the community action agencies, what they report back is the last program, if you remember, it was really a stop and start program from the very beginning. We never knew that we had a dedicated pot of money for an extended period of time. So from a business standpoint, being able to permanently staff something that you don't know is going to exist for the next 30 days is a really difficult situation to have to ask of them. This is a different dynamic where they know there is a 1-year commitment to get a program done, so their ability to reach out and staff up as they can will be much more robust. So number one, we're looking for our caps to take advantage of that. Number two, we're looking to supplement and support those efforts as we can to even out and make sure that each area of the state gets the coverage that it needs. So it's a monumental undertaking, but we're working hard at trying to address those concerns that have been raised before.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for sharing this update. And we know you'll keep in touch with us all about how we can help promote the program when you do have that guidance and are able to launch it. So appreciate your sharing what what you know
Okay.
right now. Yeah.
Thanks for having me. Take
yeah,
care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
I'm going to shift now to invite Alicia Melnick to share an update with us. MAHC for this legislative session is being represented by two firms to help us track issues that we care about. One is Eaton Peabody, who we've worked with for many, many years, and the other is Bernstein Scher. And Alicia works for Bernstein Scher and is one of the people working on a proposed affordable housing bond this session. And Alicia served as public policy counsel for the ACLU and senior policy advisor for the main speaker of the House. And Alicia, thanks for joining us today just to provide a brief overview of the legislative session to date.
Sure, I will try to be concise. I'm pretty used to these 3-minute deadlines in the legislature. For just a really broad overview, we are in our 120th legislature. In Maine, we have a 2-year legislative session. Normally, it's the regular year is the first year and the second year is the emergency. In these uncertain, strange times, it's almost like we're working in the reverse, where it feels like the tenor of the legislature is that they're looking at things that are very COVID related or kind of emergencies to be moving through. We usually run to late June, but you know, again, all of that is like everything in these times is how that will play out is unclear. There were a lot of bills that were dropped kind of unceremoniously when the legislature shut down last session. So there's a lot of new bills. I think there were over 1,900 bill titles submitted. And as of this morning, 435 bills have been released by the revisor's office and referred to committees for public hearing. Testimony will be provided a little bit differently this year, like most everything, like we are here today. Testimony is being provided via Zoom, and legislatures are doing all of their work on these dedicated YouTube channels that are very easy to subscribe to. You know, the benefit and the silver lining of this is that it can potentially open up opportunities for people to monitor and engage in the legislature and including in public hearings. It's very easy to submit testimony to public hearing and also to testify, and we would always be happy to help facilitate that. The governor has proposed her supplemental and biennial budgets. The Appropriations Committee has worked through the supplemental and is beginning to work through the biennial budget. It's an $8.4 billion budget plan for the next 2 years. It was generally better than feared, mostly flat across the board, meaning no big cuts and no major new programs or initiatives, including no proposed cuts to the home fund. There was a little bit of revenue sharing, a little bit more in school funding, but nothing really major. And I think, you know, there's some tensions. On the one hand, there's folks who feel like we've got that it's raining and pouring and we should be using resources, for example, from the rainy day fund. And there are others that feel like this fiscal uncertainty really it should encourage fiscal restraint. I think this may also, some of our budget considerations are also going to be influenced, as you've heard about, from the $1.9 trillion stimulus package that's in process at the federal level, which includes $350 billion for state, local, and tribal relief, $170 billion for K through 12 schools and higher ed. That might just relieve some of the pressure on state, on Maine lawmakers to make significant cuts. The last thing I'll just mention is that we have not gotten the governor's bond proposal yet, but we do anticipate to seeing it very soon. There will be lots of competition for bonding. And again, I think, you know, with interest rates at historic lows and certain bonding that can act as stimulus on the economy, there are some strong arguments to do some good bonding right now, including on affordable housing. So I'll leave it there, but happy to share more or answer any questions.
Great. Thank you,
So,
Alicia.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. And folks, if you have any quick questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. I'll just mention that you know, we are hopeful that the governor's bond package will include a housing element, but we don't know. And in the meantime, there is a standalone housing bond sponsored by Representative Vicky Dudera that we can use to advocate with if need be. We're also on the lookout for a whole lot of other bills that haven't made it out of revisers yet. As Alicia mentioned, I think 1,900 are put in, only 450 have come out. So that, most of these bills are still waiting to become real bills and get referred to committee and referred for hearings. And so, there's a bunch of bills in around the real estate transfer tax and monkeying around with that a little bit to hopefully raise some revenue there. There is the retake on the Zoning and Land Use Commission bill that Speaker Fecto worked with us on last year and is very committed to making happen this year. But I do get the sense, as Alicia mentioned, that a lot of these bills may get more encouraged to be pushed to the second year than is typically the case. I think typically legislators like to get as much done in year one as they can and have a smaller amount left in year two. That may be, as Alicia is referencing, kind of reversed a little bit this time so that more of these bills can be dealt with when people can be in person, which we all hope won't be too long.
Great. Well, there are no questions currently in the Q&A box here. So, yeah, no, any final announcements or things that you want to mention to folks?
Not from me. We will certainly be in touch as this state credit conformity bill kind of happens and let folks know about that, and absolutely be in touch as the rent relief program comes to life again, with thanks to Dan and the staff at Maine Housing for the attention they're giving it. It's a big deal, and it'll be one of the most important ways we prevent evictions is to make sure that that money gets out quickly and efficiently. So thank you to Maine Housing for all the work they're putting in to making that happen.
Great. So thank you everyone for joining us today. As I said at the beginning, we will make a recording of the meeting today available by email, and we'll, as Greg said, keep in touch about the efforts that we talked about today. And then we hope that you'll join us for our next MAHC membership meeting, which will likely be in April. So until then, stay well and thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.